guys, welcome back to another Hack the Box walkthrough. Today we're going to be going over the box 3 in the starting point track, which is a new box that's been added to the tier 1 level of machines. And it goes over a couple of really cool concepts with things like cloud computing. We're going to be dealing with a service that's hosted in AWS, which if we're talking about cloud environments, AWS, hosts basically all of the market share for all cloud computing services. So definitely really good to add to your repertoire and understand how things like that work. Additionally, we're going to be going over things like web attacks and web shells. So all good information when we break it down. But with that all out of the way, let's go ahead and jump right into the walkthrough. Okay, so I have this terminal pulled up here, and this is basically where we're going to be working out of for the majority of this walkthrough. When we need a web browser, I'm just going to go ahead and swap that out and, just kind of move back and forth. But for the majority of the walkthrough, we are going to be living in our command line interface right here. So to go ahead and get things started out, we're going to go ahead and make a directory and then enter into that directory just so we have everything for this machine saved in one common space. So to do that, we're just going to do make directory, call it 3, and then we're just going to do and cd to 3. And we'll run that, and then we've made the directory and we are now inside of it. So now that we've made the directory, one thing that we can do is kick off a port scan. And to do that, we're just going to do sudo nmap, and then the first flag that we're going to use is dash lowercase s capital V capital C. And basically, that is smushing this dash lowercase s capital V, which is the service version scripts that are going to run. So it'll try to find the version number of a service that's hidden behind a port. And then it's also smushing the dash lowercase s capital C, which is to run scripts for further enumeration. So it'll try to gain more information from a service that's on a port, but we're just going to smush it together and do dash lowercase s capital V capital C. Next thing we need to do is dash lowercase p dash, and dash lowercase p is how you'd specify a port. So maybe you'd want to do 139 or port 80 for like a web server or something like that. But if you just do dash p dash, it'll scan the entirety of a port range. That way, if there's a service that's on a non-standard port, so instead of the web server on port 80, they might put it on 8001 or something, and that way we'd find it with this setup here. Next thing that we need to do is do dash capital T4. So dash capital T is how you specify the throttling. If you go up to T5 is the fastest. You have a little bit of a trade-off when you go for speed versus accuracy. I found that 4 runs fairly quickly and maintains a large amount of accuracy. So we're going to stay with dash capital T4 for now. Next thing we need to do is dash capital P lowercase n. I like to think of it as no ping. Basically, it skips the ping discovery phase. So it'll save us a little bit of time. So we can do that. Another flag that I typically like to use is dash dash open. And that is only going to show us the open ports because we really only care about what's open on this machine. So that's one that I like to do. Next is dash capital O. That's going to try to perform some operating system discovery for us. And then after that, we just need to specify our IP address. So I'm going to go ahead and grab that really quick. We can just go ahead and paste it into our terminal right there. So then we're specifying the target there, and then all we need to do is dash lowercase o capital N, and that's going to save our output in the name of the file after that flag. So you can create a file. It doesn't have to be an existing file. I'm just going to call this TCP full scan because we are scanning the full range of TCP ports. And then I'm going to kick this off and cut the video over to when this is done running. Okay, so the scan is done running here, and we can kind of scroll up here to see everything from the top. But the first port that is open is going to be 22, which is SSH. SSH is never really the initial attack vector for machines unless there is some vulnerability or CVE that's critical that's associated with the version number. There's just not a lot of attack surface outside of brute forcing passwords, which for the purposes of HackTheBox isn't really necessary. So we're just going to set that aside for now, but if we point our attention to the next port, which is port 80, which is a web server, that has a lot of attack surface, and that's something that we definitely want to look into further. So as you can see, the service is HTTP. It looks like we have Apache 2.4.29. Always good to jot that version number down. You never know if you'll need it, if we need to research vulnerabilities associated with that version number right there or not. Next, you'll see we have the name the toppers on the website, and doesn't look like we get a ton else other than the fact that it thinks it's running Linux, which is good to know. So one thing that I like to do following up an Nmap scan is we're definitely going to check that website out. However, knowing that there's a website, I like to kind of run this in the background before I go and check the website out, just because we know that it's going to be there and we want to try to find any content that might not be linked on the homepage. So kind of like hidden directories, if you will. And we can do that with a directory busting scan. So it's just real quick. The tool that you'll use to do this is called GoBuster. So if you don't have it, you can just do a sudo apt install GoBuster. So it just looks like that. And then GoBuster. So that is what you would run if you don't have the tool. However, we do, so we're just going to proceed like you have the tool installed. So GoBuster, we want to put this in dir mode, so for directory brute forcing mode. And then we're going to do http : // then paste in the IP address. And then the next thing that we need to do is supply it with a word list for it to run against. So there's a default word list in Kali that you can use, that I typically like to use for quick brute forcing here. You'll just do user share dirb and then word lists. And then I just use the big.txt because it kind of just covers your bases. It's really not that, it doesn't take that much longer to run, and you're going to be running it in the background, so you're not going to pay attention to it anyways. So we'll go ahead and kick that off, and then we can pull up the web browser here. So what we want to do is browse to our IP address that we just got, and we can kind of go ahead and just slowly check out what's on this website. So now when I see a website hosted, there's a couple things that I typically like to do is I like to click around, see if there's any links, any parameters getting passed around in the URL. If there is, that opens up a whole nother door for injection possibilities, a whole variety of different things. Other than that, we're trying to look for different information that might be on the homepage here that we could use to attack the box. And this is one thing that I like to typically note down. So if you ever see an email address in a contact page here, sometimes you'll see that there's a custom domain. So, you know, they're not just using a Gmail account and they have it here. They have this custom domain name, which means that there could be other subdomains for this particular domain. So if we just go ahead and copy that, we want to make note of that really quick. And what we're going to do, we're going to add that IP address to our local DNS file on our Linux machine. It's called the etchohost file. So if we come back over, we can even start another tab here just to kick this off. But I'm going to use a text. You can use any text editor. I'm going to use Sublime as my text editor. So I'm going to do sudo subl. If you have Sublime, that's the command. If not, you can use something like Nano or VI or Vim. All of those work. But then we're just going to go over to etchohost. So it's /etc/hosts. And I'm going to try to blow this up a little bit bigger so we know what to do. So what you want to do here to get that IP address to resolve to that domain name that we saw is first you want to take the IP address, so IP address of our target, and paste that in. And then you want to hit tab and we want to come back down to where that email address was. So if we just copy, or that domain name on the email address was. So we copy that, hit paste. So what you should have is not the HTTP part there, but just the IP address, a tab, and then the domain name that we found from the email address. So you can go ahead and save that file. Make sure you save it before you quit or else it won't work. But now, instead of having to type in this IP address, we should be able to just have that IP address resolve to this common name. So if we copy this, I'll go ahead and show that to you guys in our browser here. We should just be able to do HTTP / and then our domain name, just like you would visit http google.com. Now we have a IP address resolving to a common name. And there we go. So we can use that now to do a couple of different things. But before we get ahead of ourselves, we want to jump back over and see if that scan came back with any different hidden content. And it looks like it did. So before we get too far, let's go ahead and open up what I see is this images directory. And the reason we're only going to look at this one is because the rest of them got 403 forbidden status codes. So it's not really worth our time to go look at it because we're not going to be able to access it. So to do that, all we need to do is just type in images as a directory. And in this case, we actually can view the directory listing of the images directory, which if you were looking for bug bounties, or if this was on a normal penetration test, this is something that you would report because typically you can upload files. If you were able to get a web shell somewhere else, you can easily just do point and click to either run a reverse shell, a web shell, anything of the sort. So this is bad, but for the context of this box, I'm going to save us the rabbit hole. This is not the avenue that we're going to run. So we're going to leave this alone, but good to know and little nugget to point out there. What we do want to focus on, however, is coming back to our terminal and utilizing that domain to try to enumerate subdomains. So our domain right now currently looks like this. Whoops, let me go ahead and delete that back really quick. So it looks something like this. Now, a subdomain can be in a whole different website hosted on that particular domain. And what's interesting is a lot of the times they're hosted on the same exact server. So they have the same IP address, which gets weird because right now, if you were to type in the IP address, it would only resolve to the toppers.hackthebox. However, if there are multiple applications or multiple websites that want to be hosted to a singular IP address, there's a technology called virtual hosting that can allow for multiple different websites or subdomains of a website to all be pointing to one single IP address, but we don't have that right now. So we want to try to look and see if there are other subdomains. So in our case, we might find something like app.thetoppers.htb. That might be a subdomain. That app portion would be a subdomain, or you sometimes might see like blog is a common one, like blog.thetoppers.hackthebox. Things of that nature. So we're looking for stuff like that, and conveniently enough, GoBuster actually has a mode that can be used to try to enumerate subdomains as well. So what we can do is do GoBuster, and instead, in this case, we did the dir mode before, but what we want to try to do now is the vhost mode that you can put GoBuster into. So if we put it into the vhost mode, all we need to do is supply it the same exact flags as we did before, and that's just going to be the HTTP, except for this time we can actually supply it our domain name. We don't have to put the IP address. You can, but this makes it a little bit clearer what we're trying to do. Then we need to use a word list, and the word list that I'm going to use is a part of the seclists GitHub repository. I believe it comes standard on Kali now. I don't know if it's on Parrot or not, but to install it, you just do the same exact thing like you did with GoBuster. It's that sudo apt install and then seclists. But if you already have it installed, that is going to be in user share seclists, just like that. and then it's in the discovery folder, the DNS folder, and then we are in the subdomains, and you'll see you can tab to autocomplete, but it's going to be -top 1 million dash, and then let's just use the 5,000 dot text. So it's a 5,000 of the top million subdomain names that could possibly be on the internet. So then we will hit enter and run that scan, and then I will jump back with you guys once this scan is done running. Okay, so this is done running, and we found what we wanted to find, but if you take a look at this top one here, we have s3.thetoppers.htb. And now this is kind of where that AWS component comes in. So if you're unfamiliar, in S3 is a S3 bucket, and it's an AWS service, so it's a cloud service, and it's kind of like a storage service where you can host or store a bunch of different file types, so things like basically anything you want, like images, code files. The only problem, though, is that these are highly misconfigured and commonly misconfigured. And they can lead to a lot of different things like file uploads for sites, and it can lead to a lot of different security problems. So knowing that, this is highly, highly interesting to us as pen testers looking into this box here. So what we want to do is kind of go back to that Etsy host file again. So once again, you do the same exact command. You just do sudo, in your case, nano or subl if you have Sublime installed, vi, whatever you want, and then Etsy hosts. I already have it pulled up here, so we're just going to re-pull this up. And all we need to actually do is take this domain name that we found, or this subdomain rather that we found, and go to right where we had the toppers.hackthebox, and we can do another tab and just hit enter. So we're just going to paste that name. So what you should have is the IP address of the box, and then you should have our first top level domain here for the toppers.hackthebox, and then the subdomain s3.thetoppers.hackthebox. So go ahead and save that file, and then we can get rid of that. And what we want to do now is try to pull up our web browser and see if we can check out what is on that S3 bucket. So if we'll do s3.thetoppers.htb, you should see this status running, and this is kind of just the default page for it. We'll go ahead and see if we hit Control-Shift-I to pull up the dev tools, if there's anything hidden in the code, maybe that was hard coded to be written like that to the page to be deceiving. Doesn't look like there's anything there. So what we want to do now is see if we can interact with this S3 bucket maybe. And what you do to do that is we can come back over to the CLI, and AWS actually has their own command line interface tool that you can use to interact with it. And it's just AWS is how you would run it. If you don't have it installed, you just do sudo apt install AWS CLI. And then if you hit enter, that'll run, install everything. If you don't have it installed, go ahead, pause the video, install it, and then jump back in. But we're going to proceed like you have it installed. The reason we want to try to interact with this via the command line interface is for a security misconfiguration reason. So AWS actually uses a set of keys to manage your access to things, except for they're very commonly misconfigured in the fact that it won't check the actual contents of your keys to interact with it, or they're just not looking for the keys at all, and you can just supply garbage data to the keys and still interact with the service that's being hosted there. To do that, we want to try to supply some garbage data because the command line interface won't actually work unless there's something stored as our keys. So to put something there, we can do AWS and then configure, and that's going to bring up this configuration prompt for us. Now, Like I said, this doesn't mean anything, so we can just type in whatever we want into these access keys, and we will just kind of go with whatever here. So we'll just enter in some garbage data for all of these prompts. You can see obviously those don't mean anything, and it's definitely not what it's expecting there. So we'll just go ahead and get rid of it. And then now what we should be able to do is we should be able to interact with this S3 bucket, or at least list the S3 buckets that are hosted there. So to do that, we want to do AWS-endpoint, because we need to specify where it's at, and then do equals http:// then s3 dot the toppers dot htb, and then s3, and then we're just going to run ls as the command to list the S3 buckets there. We are specifying S3 before that because we want to specify the service that we want to list. So that's the endpoint. We're going to specify if there's any buckets there, or S3 buckets there with the S3 subcommand, and then ls to list those buckets. And I had a little bit of a typo there, but if you go ahead and hit enter, you should see that the buckets get listed there. So that is the actual S3 bucket that's hosted on this endpoint. Now what we want to try to do is expand upon that command and list the actual contents of this S3 bucket. So I just hit the up arrow to bring up our last command again. And then if we specify S3 as the protocol, just like how you specify HTTP here as the protocol with this prefix, we can specify S3 as the protocol at the end here and try to list the contents of this bucket and see what's hosted on this S3 bucket. So if we do that and we just do the toppers dot HTTP, or .htb rather. So we have AWS --endpoint equals HTTP s3.thetoppers.hackthebox. We're using S3 as the service. We're trying to list the contents of this S3 bucket. So that is the name of the S3 bucket that was right here. So you'll see that's the name of the bucket. We're using S3 as the protocol, and then we're specifying the name of the bucket. So if we hit enter, we should see what's in the bucket now, and we do. So this is really good to know because it looks like that images directory is being hosted by this S3 bucket as well. But then we also see on the web root here that we have an index.php file. So that means that the whole website is being hosted out of this S3 bucket. And additionally, we get to see that the website is running off of PHP, which is really good because PHP is awesome as a scripting language to throw together web shells. And from web shells, we can get reverse shells for more persistent access on a machine for compromise. So that's all really good to know. So before we get too far ahead, why don't we throw together a little bit of a web shell that we can use here just to issue some commands to the box and see if we can utilize it to get a reverse shell on the machine. So to do that, I'm going to just use Sublime once again as a way to do some text editing. You can do this in Nano. Again, it really doesn't matter. I'm going to call our file shell.php. And then every PHP script is going to start out with this angled bracket $PHP. That's how you specify that you're running PHP. And then we're just going to use this system function. So the system function takes whatever it's passed in as a parameter and executes it as an operating system command, which is really good because if we can upload this to the target, we can theoretically pass it some data and then have that data executed on the operating system itself. And since PHP was designed as a scripting language for web development, it has some built-in variables that can be used to get data from get parameters. So to do that, we just need this $_get. That's a built-in variable in the PHP scripting language that we can use to get information from URL get parameters. Now we just need to specify the name of the get parameter. So it's in this little array. We're just going to call ours command, But basically what's going to happen here is when we upload this script, so this shell.php script, it's going to live there, and we're going to issue a GET request to get that shell.php script. And then we're going to pass it this command parameter. And then the contents of that command parameter are going to get set in this get variable. And that is then going to be executed as an operating system command. So we're going to pass in an operating system command, or like who am I, or ID, into this command parameter. And it's going to execute that as a operating system command. So we'll just go ahead and finish that line off with a semicolon, question mark, and angled bracket to finish the script. So just one quick line there that can be used to upload a web shell and then issue operating system commands. And now what we want to try to do is copy that shell script up to the S3 bucket. That way we can issue it some operating system commands and try to see if we can execute arbitrary code on the machine. So to do that, we're going to go ahead and pull up our previous command. Now we need to do basically the same exact thing, except for instead of listing the contents here, we want to do copy. So we used ls to list, we're going to use cp to copy. We're going to copy our shell.php script. We still want to specify the S3 bucket that we are targeting, so we can keep that at the exact same. So everything's going to be the exact same once again. We just need to change our command portion here from ls to copy shell.php, or whatever you named your web shell. So if we go ahead and run this, we should be able to upload this script to the S3 bucket. And boom, you see we got a successful upload, and it is now hosted in the web root. It is on the toppers.hackthebox and shell.php. So it's right there. We can go ahead and jump over to the browser and see if we can interact with this in a way where we can issue it some operating system commands. Okay, so we're back over on the website now over here. And what we want to do is we want to navigate to our shell.php, and then we just want to do a question mark to specify that we are now going to start using some get parameters. And we'll just do command, so that was the name of that parameter that we called in our shell.php script. And we're just going to say the value is, we'll just do ID, it'll autocomplete in this case. And we should see something like the groups that we're in, or the ID number of the user that's executing this S3 bucket on the operating system itself. So if we go ahead and run this, we can see that we now have the ability to execute arbitrary commands on the machine, which is good because we can try to use a couple of different utilities to establish a reverse shell and get a more persistent connection. So we can do a bunch of things here, and technically this is, this is critical in and of itself, but we want to take this one step further and demonstrate that we can establish persistence on this actual box. So we can do like who am I, and we are running as www data on the back end, which is very typical for web servers to run as www data. It's a little bit of a sandboxed user on Linux machines for HTTP servers, but that's a little bit cart before the horse. So we will now try to set up a reverse shell. And one website that I really like to use to get reverse shells is this revshells.com. So you'll just go to revshells.com, and I'll explain why in 1 second. So most of the operating systems all have this dev TCP tool that you can use as a little bit of a networking tool to try to send yourself a reverse shell if you get this case. And now a lot of the courses try to teach you to use Netcat as a listener on their end, but a lot of times now Netcat's not even installed on the machines by default because it's such a security problem, and all of the security problems that it's had in the past, there's almost no reason to have it on the machines when it's put into production. So What you can use, however, is this dev TCP tool, and that is going to be on almost every single Linux system that's out there. So what we can do is we can use this tool right here, but what we need to do first is jump back over to our terminal, and we want to run ifconfig, which is going to list our IP, but we want the IP address of the ton0 interface because that's the VPN interface for HackTheBox. So we'll go ahead and do that. Mine is 10.10.14.14. So we'll go ahead and take that. And the reason that I like this website so much is because you can actually just plop in your own IP address up here and change the port just right here. And I typically like to run this over like 443 because it's a little bit more stealthy. Anytime you open up a port on like quad 4 or like 1337 or 9001, you're just gonna light up a security detection in real life. So it's good practice to try to hide it on things that would typically not look suspicious, like HTTPS on 443. So we go ahead and copy our reverse shell here. What we should then be able to do is use our web shell to issue this command and then have our target machine run this connection back to us, and we'll catch that shell on our machine with a listener and establish a persistent connection to the target. So what we can do is come back over to our web shell. But I guess before we do that, really quick, let's set up a netcat listener. So to do that, we want to do nc-l for listening mode, v for verbose output, n because we don't want any DNS name resolution, so that means no name resolution, and then p to specify the port, and we did this over 443. So if we go ahead and run that, actually I'm gonna run this with sudo privileges just because. And then with our netcat listener set up, we wanna do one last thing really quick. So now that we have that reverse shell, we're gonna use a little bit of a unique technique here. So what we'll do is we will grab this reverse shell, we're gonna copy that, and then we're gonna come back over, and we are going to echo the contents of that reverse shell. So go ahead and paste it inside single quotation marks. And then we want to write this to a file called shell.sh. So sh is a bash script, basically. So if you go ahead and enter that in, now we have that file in a bash script. And what we want to do is start a web server on this directory where you just wrote your reverse shell script to. So to do that, if we do Python 3, you can do -m and then http.server. We'll run this. I like to run this on port 8080 is typically how we do that. But basically, we have this HTTP server open here, and we're going to be hosting our reverse shell script. So now we have a listener set up that's ready to catch our reverse shell, and we have a web server that is serving our reverse shell script. Now, all that we need to do is go back over to our web shell and issue a curl command or a wget, whatever you want to use here. I'm going to use curl. That's going to make a network request to our IP address over HTTP, which is going to look into our HTTP server that is held up there, or that's being served there over port 8080. And we're going to get that reverse shell script, and then we're going to pipe that into bash. So basically what's going to happen on the target machine is it's going to reach out, grab that reverse shell script from us, and then it's going to run that reverse shell, and that reverse shell is then going to trigger and send the shell back to our netcat listener, and then our netcat listener should catch the shell, and we should have persistent access on this machine. So to do all that, that sounds really scary, but it's really not. All we need to do is come back to our web shell. We need to do curl, and then we need to URL encode spaces because that's an odd character that's handled very poorly by the HTTP protocol. So when it's in the URL, it needs to be encoded. So %20 is the URL encoded version of a space. And then we just need our IP address, which was 10.10.14.14. And that is our own IP address. And I'm actually just going to double check that over here just to be 100% positive. 10.10.14.14. So we have our IP address, and then we need a colon, and then we need to specify the port that our HTTP server is running on. So that was colon and then 8080 for us. Then we need to do / and we need to get the name of the reverse shell script that we wrote to. So in this case, we called it shell.sh, and then you're going to use a pipe character. So that pipe character is basically going to take the contents of this curl command, so everything that comes before it, and write the output and put it into the next command, which is bash. So basically think we're going to take the contents of our shell script, it's going to grab it over the internet, and then it's going to run it in a new bash instance. So with all of that written in, we should then be able to go back over to our terminal and see that we caught the reverse shell in our netcat listener, which we did. So now if we just run ID, we should be able to see the same exact output as before, but we have a reverse shell connection. So we can just do ls to see what we have here. We can go back, we'll do pwd to print the working directory that we're in, and we're in the web root, so it's var www.html. If we go back one, we'll see what's in that. And it looks like the flag is right there. So if we just do cat flag.text, we should have our flag right there. So I'm going to go ahead and jot that down so I have it and I can solve the box myself. But there we go. We have it, and we fully compromised the box 3 on HackTheBox. There's actually no privilege escalation for this box, so you don't have to waste your time with any privilege escalation, but a really cool way to explore AWS and look into a lot of misconfigured services. Again, this is a pretty vital skill that is very applicable to real-world pen testing, but once again, it's such a vital skill to have, and I'm glad that we could walk through everything together. So if you like the video, please feel free to leave a like, share, and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.